I was brewing my morning coffee in my little studio apartment when my phone buzzed against the granite counter. The notification showed a Facebook message from Dorothy Henderson, my old neighbor from Maple Street. We hadn't spoken since I moved away 3 years ago, but seeing her name still made my chest tighten with memories I'd tried to forget. The message was short, no pleasantries. "Margaret, I'm so sorry about what happened. I can't believe what I'm seeing right now." My hands trembled as I opened the video she'd attached. The camera focused on the front of Riverside Methodist Church, the same church where I'd taken my children for Easter services, where I'd sung in the choir for 15 years. The familiar red brick facade and white steeple looked exactly the same, but something felt wrong. The video zoomed in on 2 figures standing at the pulpit inside. My breath caught in my throat. There was my son Lucas, 42 years old, wearing his black suit, the one I'd bought him for his college graduation. Beside him stood my daughter-in-law Cassandra, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, her blonde hair perfectly styled even in her supposed grief. Behind them sat a mahogany casket, polished and gleaming under the sanctuary lights. And next to that casket was a large framed photograph that made my coffee mug slip from my fingers and shatter on the kitchen floor. It was my picture. My face, smiling back from what looked like a memorial service. "Mom was always stubborn," Lucas's voice echoed through my phone speaker. "She made some choices that hurt our family, but we loved her despite everything. Though she left this world too soon, we pray she's finally found the peace that escaped her in life." My vision blurred. This couldn't be real. I pressed my back against the refrigerator, legs suddenly too weak to hold me up. Lucas was reading my eulogy, but I was standing right here, alive and breathing in my little apartment above the bakery on 5th Street. I rewound the video and played it again, searching for some explanation. Cassandra spoke next, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. "The accident was so sudden. We got the call from the hospital in Phoenix, and by the time we could get there..." She dissolved into theatrical sobs. What accident? I'd never been to Phoenix. I'd been living quietly here in Cedar Falls, Iowa, working at Murphy's Diner, keeping my head down and my heart closed off from the family that had cast me out like yesterday's garbage. The camera panned across the congregation, and I recognized faces I hadn't seen in years. My cousin Betty from Des Moines. The Johnsons from down the street. Even old Pastor Williams, though he looked frielier than I remembered. They were all there, all dressed in black, all believing I was dead. But the most chilling part was how calm Lucas and Cassandra looked. No real tears, no genuine grief. Their performance was too polished, too rehearsed. This wasn't a sudden tragedy they were dealing with, this was something they'd planned. As the video ended with the congregation singing Amazing Grace, one thought echoed in my mind: why would my own son declare me dead when I was very much alive? It wasn't always like this. There was a time when Lucas called me every Sunday, when Cassandra actually smiled when she saw me, when I believed family meant something more than blood and shared last names. That illusion died 3 years ago on a Tuesday morning that started with accusations and ended with me being thrown out of my own life. The trouble began when the books at Henderson Family Construction didn't balance. My late husband Jacob had built that company from nothing, and after he passed, Lucas took over while I handled the finances. For 23 years, I'd managed every dollar, every invoice, every payroll check. I knew those numbers like I knew my own heartbeat. When $75,000 went missing, Lucas didn't ask questions, he made assumptions. The evidence pointed to me, my signature on withdrawal slips, my access to the accounts, my name on transactions I swore I'd never made. But it wasn't me who'd been bleeding the company dry. It was Cassandra. My daughter-in-law had expensive tastes and a credit card habit that would make a Las Vegas gambler blush. Designer purses, jewelry, weekend trips to Chicago, a kitchen renovation that cost more than most people's cars. When the bills came due and Lucas's salary couldn't cover her lifestyle, she found another way to pay. I discovered the truth by accident, finding duplicate withdrawal slips in Cassandra's car when she asked me to grab her sunglasses. Her handwriting, her forgeries, but somehow my signature had been copied with frightening accuracy. When I confronted her in my kitchen that morning, she didn't deny it. "You can't prove anything," she said, calmly eating my homemade apple pie like we were discussing the weather. "Lucas will never believe you over me." She was right. When I showed Lucas the evidence, when I begged him to look at the bank records more carefully, when I pointed out that Cassandra's shopping sprees coincided perfectly with the missing money, he chose his wife over his mother. "I've had enough of your jealousy, Mom," he said, his voice cold as January in Iowa. "Cassandra warned me you'd try something like this when you realized we didn't need you anymore." The words that came next still echo in my mind. "You're not family anymore. Pack your things and get out. Don't contact us, don't come to the house, don't try to see the grandkids. You're dead to us." By evening, I was gone. No money, they'd frozen the accounts. No explanation to anyone, they controlled the narrative. Just silence and the crushing weight of betrayal from the son I'd raised alone after his father died. I tried calling, texting, sending letters. Nothing. My phone number was blocked. When I reached out to old friends and neighbors, they suddenly stopped returning my calls. One by one, doors that had been open for decades slammed shut. I became a ghost, not just to my family but to the entire community that had once embraced me. Eventually, I did what broken people do. I ran. Sold what little I had, moved to Cedar Falls where nobody knew my name or my shame, and learned to live quietly. I worked at Murphy's Diner, rented a small apartment, and tried to build a life from the pieces they'd left me. But even then, deep in my heart, I held on to hope. Hope that someday Lucas would realize his mistake, that Cassandra's lies would catch up with her, that my son would remember the mother who'd sacrificed everything for him after his father's heart attack took him at 52. That hope died the day I tried to renew my old email account and was told it had been deactivated due to a report of user deceased. My name had been marked as dead in their system, officially, digitally, completely. They hadn't just disowned me. They'd erased me. That night, after watching my own funeral on a stranger's phone, I couldn't sleep. The video played on repeat in my mind, their fake tears, my face beside a casket, a room full of people mourning someone who was making grilled cheese sandwiches for the midnight shift at Murphy's Diner. Something wasn't right. You don't just decide to hold a funeral 3 years after supposedly cutting someone out of your life. There had to be a reason, and I was going to find it. I started with my sister Ruth in Burlington. We'd been close before everything fell apart, talking every week, sharing recipes and grandchildren's stories. When she answered on the second ring, her voice was warm with recognition. "Maggie? Oh my God, is this really you?" Relief flooded through me. Finally, someone who knew I was alive. "Ruth, yes, it's me. I need to ask you something important. What did Lucas tell everyone about what happened to me?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she whispered, "Honey, Lucas said you died in a car accident in Arizona 2 years ago. He showed us the death certificate and everything. We had a memorial service." My stomach dropped to my feet. "Ruth, I've never been to Arizona. I'm calling you from Iowa right now. I've been working at a diner, living in an apartment above Murphy's Bakery. But the certificate, and the insurance. Maggie, if you're alive, then Lucas." Her voice trailed off as the implications hit her. I spent the next hour on the phone with Ruth, piecing together the story Lucas and Cassandra had told everyone. According to them, I'd moved to Phoenix after our falling out, became depressed and reclusive, and died when my car went off a mountain road during a rainstorm. Closed casket, they said, because the body was too damaged. "Lucas handled everything," Ruth explained, her voice shaking now. "He said you'd wanted to be cremated, that there wasn't much left anyway. He showed us pictures of your apartment in Phoenix, your final bills, even a suicide note. A suicide note I'd never written, for a death that never happened, in a state I'd never visited." After hanging up with Ruth, I drove to the Cedar Falls Public Library and used their computer to search online records. What I found made my blood run cold. There it was in the Iowa Department of Health vital records: Margaret Rose Henderson, age 64, date of death March 15, cause of death, motor vehicle accident, location, Phoenix, Arizona. Status, deceased. Certificate number, AZ 2022-047891. They'd made it official. Legal. I was dead on paper. But why go through all this trouble? Why not just let our estrangement stand? Why forge documents and hold memorial services for someone you claimed to want nothing to do with? The answer came when I searched deeper into public records and found something that made me want to throw the library computer against the wall. Henderson Family Construction had received a massive insurance payout 18 months ago. Life insurance. My life insurance. The policy Jacob had taken out years ago, the one that made me the beneficiary of his construction business and made Lucas the beneficiary of mine. $500,000, paid to my loving son upon proof of my accidental death. But that wasn't all. The family farm in Riverside that I'd inherited from my parents, 120 acres of prime Iowa farmland, had been quietly sold 8 months after my supposed death. Market value, $800,000. My son hadn't just declared me dead for convenience. He'd killed me on paper and cashed in on my corpse. As I sat in that library, surrounded by the quiet rustle of pages and the soft hum of computers, one thing became crystal clear: if Lucas wanted me dead, he was about to discover just how alive I really was. The next morning, I walked into the offices of Peterson, Walsh & Associates with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse and fire burning in my chest. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, looked concerned when she saw my face. "I need to see a lawyer," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to challenge my own death." 20 minutes later, I sat across from Amanda Walsh, a sharp-eyed attorney in her 40s who specialized in fraud cases. She listened without interruption as I laid out my story, sliding document after document across her mahogany desk. Passport with no stamps from Arizona. Bank records showing transactions in Iowa during the time I was supposedly dead in Phoenix. Employment records from Murphy's Diner. Lease agreements for my apartment. A trail of evidence that painted a clear picture: Margaret Henderson was very much alive. "This is fraud on multiple levels," Amanda said, shaking her head as she reviewed the forged death certificate. "Insurance fraud, inheritance fraud, falsification of government documents. Your son could be looking at serious prison time." "I don't want him in prison," I said, surprising myself with the words. "I want my life back." Amanda nodded. "We'll start with a petition to revoke the death certificate and a formal complaint of fraud with the insurance company." "But Margaret." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Cases like this take time. Months, maybe longer." "I don't have months," I interrupted. "Because apparently, I have a memorial service this Sunday." The tip had come from an unlikely source, a text message from a number I didn't recognize, sent to the old phone I'd thought was disconnected. "Memorial service for Margaret Henderson, Sunday 2 p.m., Riverside Methodist Church. Thought you should know. A friend." Amanda's eyebrows shot up. "Another memorial service? But you said they already had one 3 years ago." "This is different," I said, remembering the video Dorothy had sent. "The first one was small, quiet. This one's bigger. More people, more ceremony. I think they're celebrating something." We spent the next 3 hours planning. Amanda would file the legal papers first thing Monday morning. I would gather more evidence, document everything, and prepare for what would likely be a long legal battle. But first, I had a memorial service to attend. That evening, I drove past Riverside Methodist Church for the first time in 3 years. Cars were already arriving for the Saturday evening service, and I could see through the tall windows that the sanctuary was being decorated. White lilies, the kind they use for funerals. Programs being stacked on tables. A large photograph on an easel, my photograph. I parked across the street and watched as Cassandra directed 2 men carrying flower arrangements. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than I made in a month, and diamond earrings that caught the late sunlight. Grief jewelry, I supposed. My son appeared in the doorway, checking his watch and speaking to Pastor Williams. Lucas looked good, healthy, successful, like a man who'd recently come into money. Which, of course, he had. My money. As I watched them prepare for my memorial service, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal that had consumed me for 3 years began to transform into something harder, cleaner. They had buried me to hide their crimes, erased me to cover their greed, and now they were celebrating my death while spending my inheritance. Tomorrow, they would learn that some ghosts refuse to stay buried. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Amanda: "Change of plans. I'm not waiting until Monday to come back from the dead." Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of October day that makes Iowa beautiful. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, carefully applying makeup for the first time in months. Red lipstick, Jacob always said it made me look fierce. A black dress I'd bought for his funeral 8 years ago. Pearl earrings my mother had given me on my wedding day. If I was going to crash my own memorial service, I was going to look the part. Riverside Methodist Church had never looked so full. Cars lined Maple Street like a parade of grief, their occupants dressed in somber black, carrying flowers and tissues. The heavy oak doors stood wide open, revealing glimpses of the crowded sanctuary beyond. I parked across the street and watched as people I'd known for decades filed past. The Hendersons from the hardware store. My old book club friends. Neighbors who'd stopped speaking to me after Lucas spread his lies. They all believed they were mourning Margaret Henderson, but the real Margaret Henderson was sitting in a rented Honda Civic, very much alive and very much ready for justice. Inside, the service had begun. Through the tall windows, I could see the altar area decorated with elaborate flower arrangements. White roses, lilies, baby's breath, the works. My photograph, enlarged and mounted on professional easel, gazed serenely over the congregation. I remembered when that picture was taken, Lucas's wedding day, 15 years ago. I'd been so happy then, proud of my handsome son and hopeful about my new daughter-in-law. The irony wasn't lost on me. Pastor Williams stood at the pulpit, his familiar voice carrying through the open doors. We gather today to remember Margaret Henderson, a devoted mother and pillar of our community. The same words he'd spoken at Jacob's funeral. Probably the same template he used for everyone. Then Lucas rose to speak. My son, tall, broad-shouldered, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored black suit. The suit I'd helped him pick out for his father's funeral, back when we were still family. My mother was a complicated woman, he began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd rehearsed this speech. She made choices that hurt our family, that drove us apart. But despite everything, despite the pain she caused, we loved her. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the congregation. I could see heads nodding, tissues being dabbed at eyes. They were buying every word. The accident in Arizona was sudden, Lucas continued. By the time we got the call, it was too late. She died alone, far from home, carrying secrets she never shared with us. Secrets. Like the secret that I was sitting 50 yards away, very much alive, listening to him lie to a church full of people who'd known me since I was 22 years old. Cassandra stood next, elegant in her grief. Margaret and I had our differences, she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. But she was Lucas's mother, and for that, I tried to love her. I wish I could have told her one last time that despite everything, she was family. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. This from the woman who'd stolen $75,000 and let me take the blame. Who'd convinced my son to cut me out of his life. Who was now wearing jewelry bought with my inheritance money while pretending to mourn me. Pastor Williams raised his hand. Let us now stand for a moment of silence to honor Margaret's memory. The entire congregation rose to their feet. Heads bowed. Eyes closed. Hands folded over hearts in perfect, practiced grief. And in that moment of absolute silence, I opened the car door. My heels clicked against the asphalt as I crossed the street. Click, click, click. Each step deliberate, measured, building toward a confrontation 3 years in the making. I reached the church steps and paused. Through the open doors, I could see the back of the congregation, row upon row of bowed heads paying respects to my memory. At the front, my giant photograph gazed down at them all, younger me, smiling me, the me who'd believed in family loyalty and the power of unconditional love. That woman was dead. But the woman standing on these church steps? She was very much alive. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped into the sanctuary. The sound of my heels on the marble floor echoed through the silence like gunshots. Click, click, click. One by one, heads began to turn. The first gasp came from somewhere in the middle of the church, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the silence like a blade. Then another. And another. The quiet murmur of confusion began to spread through the congregation like ripples on a pond. I kept walking down the center aisle, my heels marking time on the marble floor. Click, click, click. Every eye in the building followed my progress, but I kept my gaze fixed on the front of the church, where my son stood frozen at the pulpit. Is that? Someone whispered. It can't be, came another voice. Mom. A child's voice, high and confused. Mom, isn't that Grandma Maggie? Lucas's face had gone white as the lilies surrounding my portrait. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Cassandra, standing beside him, swayed on her feet before gripping the altar rail to steady herself. When I reached the front of the church, I turned to face the congregation. Dozens of faces stared back at me, shocked, confused, some frightened. These were my neighbors, my former friends, people who'd known me for decades. And they were looking at me like I'd risen from the grave. Which, in a way, I had. I cleared my throat once and spoke into the silence. I heard I died, but I'm here to correct the record. The ripple that went through the room was almost physical. Someone's hymnal fell to the floor with a thud. A woman in the third row started crying, real tears this time, not the polite memorial service kind. There was no accident, I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. No tragic car crash in Arizona. No closed casket because the body was unrecognizable. I pulled a manila folder from my purse, thick, official, stamped with government seals. These are my passport records, my employment documents, my lease agreements. I've been alive. I've been working. I've been surviving right here in Iowa while my family cashed in on my death. I turned to look directly at Lucas, whose face had gone from white to green. They forged documents, filed false reports, and collected insurance money on a woman who was making pancakes at Murphy's Diner while they held her funeral. The murmur from the congregation grew louder. I could hear phones being pulled from purses, the soft sound of cameras starting to record. Good. Let them document this. Let the world see what kind of man declares his own mother dead for money. The life insurance payout was $500,000, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. The family farm they sold after my death brought in $800,000 more. All told, my son made over $1 million by killing me on paper. Cassandra found her voice first. This is insane, she said, her cultured tones cracking with panic. Margaret, you're clearly having some kind of breakdown. Don't. I cut her off with a look that could have frozen July. Don't you dare try to gaslight me in front of all these people. Not after what you did. I turned back to the congregation, many of whom were now openly staring at their phones as they tried to process what they were seeing. 3 years ago, Cassandra embezzled $75,000 from our family business. When the books didn't balance, she let me take the blame. My son chose to believe I was a thief rather than admit his wife was the one stealing from us. That's not true, Lucas finally found his voice, but it came out as a croak. Isn't it? I reached into my folder and pulled out bank statements, photocopied receipts, credit card bills. I have proof of every purchase, every withdrawal, every forged signature. The evidence is all here, just like it was 3 years ago when I tried to show you. The congregation was buzzing now, voices rising as the implications sank in. These people had mourned me, had sent flowers and casseroles to my son, had prayed for my soul. And all of it had been based on lies. You threw me out of my own life, I said, looking directly at Lucas. You told everyone I was dead to cover up your wife's crimes and cash in on my insurance. You sold the farm my daddy left me, spent my inheritance money, and held memorial services to make it all look legitimate. Lucas's composure finally cracked. You don't understand, he said, his voice rising. The business was failing, the debts were piling up, we were going to lose everything. So you decided to lose me instead. The words hung in the air like a condemnation. In the silence that followed, I could hear Cassandra sobbing, real tears this time, the kind that come when your carefully constructed world falls apart in front of a church full of witnesses. I looked out at the congregation one more time, at all the faces I'd known for decades. You buried me to protect yourselves, I said quietly. But I came back to haunt you with the truth. Then I turned and walked back down that aisle, my heels clicking against the marble in perfect rhythm. Behind me, chaos erupted, voices raised in shock and anger, phones ringing as people called family and friends, the sound of my son's voice trying desperately to explain the unexplainable. But I didn't look back. Margaret Henderson had been dead for 3 years. It was time for her to live again. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once the video from my memorial service went viral. Someone in that congregation had live-streamed the whole thing on Facebook, and within hours, the story of the woman who crashed her own funeral was spreading across the internet like wildfire. Amanda Walsh became my voice in the courtroom, filing motion after motion with the precision of a surgeon. The forged death certificate was nullified within a week. The insurance company launched their own investigation, freezing Lucas and Cassandra's assets and demanding immediate repayment of the fraudulent claim. The Iowa Department of Revenue got involved when they realized someone had been filing tax returns for a dead woman. I sat in Amanda's office 2 months later, signing the final papers that would officially restore my legal existence. Margaret Rose Henderson was alive again, with all the rights and protections that came with breathing. The insurance company settled, Amanda said, sliding a check across her desk. $500,000, plus interest and damages. The farm sale is being reversed. You'll get the full $800,000 back, plus appreciation. And the construction company. She smiled grimly. Well, let's just say Lucas is going to be working for someone else for a very long time. I looked at the numbers on the settlement check. More money than I'd ever seen in one place, enough to start over anywhere I wanted. But something else mattered more than the money. What about Lucas and Cassandra? Plea bargain, Amanda said. Cassandra gets 2 years for embezzlement and fraud. Lucas gets 5 for insurance fraud and falsifying government documents. They'll both be disbarred from handling any business involving estates or insurance claims. 5 years. My son would spend 5 years in prison for declaring me dead. Part of me, the mother part that had raised him alone after Jacob's heart attack, felt a stab of pain at the thought. But the larger part, the part that had been erased and buried and mourned while very much alive, felt something else entirely. Justice. I used some of the settlement money to buy a house in Cedar Falls, a small craftsman bungalow with a garden and a front porch swing. Close enough to Riverside that I could visit Jacob's grave when I wanted, far enough away that I wouldn't have to see the whispers and stares every time I went to the grocery store. The story had made national news. Iowa woman attends own funeral, was the headline in USA Today. I'd been interviewed by CNN, profiled in People magazine, and invited on 3 different talk shows. But I turned them all down. I'd spent 3 years invisible. I didn't need to be famous now. What I needed was to rebuild the life they'd tried to steal from me. I planted roses in my new garden, the same variety I'd grown behind the house on Maple Street. I started volunteering at the Cedar Falls Food Bank, helping other people who'd fallen through society's cracks. I joined a book club, made new friends who knew my story but didn't define me by it. And every Sunday, I drove to Riverside to visit Jacob's grave and tell him about my week. The roses are blooming, I said on a warm May morning, 6 months after my resurrection. Remember how you always said they smelled like hope? I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant. The headstone didn't answer, but I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of the anger and bitterness I'd carried for so long. Lucas had stolen 3 years of my life, but I wasn't going to let him steal the rest of it. I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me and turned to see a young woman approaching hesitantly. She was maybe 25, with Lucas's dark hair and Jacob's blue eyes. My granddaughter, Lucas's daughter from his first marriage, a child I'd barely known before the falling out. Grandma Maggie? Her voice was small, uncertain. I stood up slowly, my heart hammering. Hello, Katie. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was truly alive again. I never believed them, she whispered against my shoulder. Even when they showed me the death certificate, even when they had the funeral. I knew you wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. We stood there among the headstones, holding each other while the roses bloomed around us. 3 years of forced silence, 3 years of being dead to my own family, and here was proof that love sometimes survives even the deepest betrayals. I'm sorry about Dad, Katie said when we finally pulled apart. What he did was unforgivable. He made his choices, I said gently. Now we all have to live with them. Can I visit you? At your new house? I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in longer than I could remember. I was hoping you'd ask. As we walked back to our cars together, I realized that being declared dead had taught me something valuable about being alive. Family isn't just blood and shared names and inheritance money. It's the people who refuse to let you disappear, who remember your voice even when everyone else has forgotten it, who show up at cemetery gates with tears in their eyes and forgiveness in their hearts. Margaret Henderson had died 3 years ago in a web of lies and greed. But the woman walking out of Riverside Cemetery that morning, she was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who understood that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. And what truly mattered was standing right beside me, planning a future I thought I'd never have again. The dead don't get second chances. But the living? We get as many as we're brave enough to take. Don't let this story die here. Thumbs up, smash that like button if Margaret's courage inspired you to never give up on your own truth. Bell, subscribe for more incredible true stories of people who refused to stay buried, who fought back against injustice, and who proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up when everyone thinks you're gone. Speech balloon, comment below and share your own story of being written off, but coming back stronger. A time when you had to fight for your truth. Someone you know who needs to hear Margaret's message. What you would have done in Margaret's shoes. Outbox Dre, share this story with someone who feels invisible, forgotten, or betrayed. Let them know their story isn't over yet. Every like helps this story reach someone who needs to hear it. Every comment creates a community of survivors. Every share might save someone who's ready to give up. Your engagement isn't just numbers, it's proof that voices like Margaret's and yours matter.